Previously, in the Captain's Table Part 1.
Well, this looks like it could be a good spot. The Captain's Table. Well, it looks like it's been here a while, but I don't remember seeing it before.
I don't remember seeing it either. But sounds good anyway. Let's go in.
Good place as any.
Look at this place. There are people in uniforms here from all over the galaxy.
Isn't that the uniform in the corner? That of the Promethean vessel? They died out 10,000 years ago.
I see one from the 19th century Russian Navy. Remarkable. Is there some kind of costume party going on here?
Bartender!
Welcome to the Captain's Table. You are Alec Grigory, Edward Stanfield, and Alex McKnight, are you not? Welcome to my humble establishment. The Captain's Table is a bar that exists outside the confines of time and space. The only requirements to enter is to have the rank of captain in whatever service you are in, from ancient Earth navies to alien space services. Food and drinks are served from around the galaxy, and the only cost is a story for each one of you.
Mind if I join you?
Ray Martin? Captain of the Saladin?
Last I looked, I was. I'm not too sure how I got here, or even where here is, but this looks like a Starfleet table. Waitress, a margarita, if you please.
Bartender!
Those are interesting tales. May I join you as well?
Of course. I don't recognize your uniform, though.
Sorry, Captain Miles O'Brien, USS Reliant.
What about you, Captain? What kind of story do you have to tell us?
I love hearing these stories. Allow me to introduce myself, gentlemen. My name is Michael Decker. I command the Starship Ranger. I guess you'd say I was from the early to mid 24th century.
This has been some evening. I could stay here for several more hours. But I think we're going to need to go to get some sleep.
I guess you're right, Alex. Captains, it's been an honor meeting all of you.
Gentlemen, remember when I said that the Captain's Table existed outside the confines of time and space? It exists on whatever world or station you're on, whenever you are, and want to enter it. And since it's outside of time, you only remember what you learned here while you are in here. You won't remember anything told to you by anyone else from here.
So I guess that means no harm, no foul, as they say.
Good to know, although I'd love to remember some of these stories. Well, good night, everyone.
Well, gentlemen, it was a pleasure meeting you all. I suppose we now forget everything we just heard, but for the moment, here's Starfleet's finest. May the wind be at your backs. If you gentlemen will excuse me, I just spotted a couple of other friends of mine across the bar. I'm going to go say hello to them. Take care.
Captain.
And now, the conclusion. The Captain's Table, Part 2. Space. The Final Frontier. These are the voyages of the starship Saladin. Her 4-year mission: to maintain the peace and security of the Federation, to explore strange new worlds, to seek out new life forms and new civilizations, to boldly go where no man has gone before. Captain's personal log, stardate, meaningless. I've just gone through the looking glass into a bar that exists outside time and space as we know it. I've shared drinks with captains from my own future and have been told that as long as I am at the captain's table, anything I hear or say will not be remembered. Part of me is wondering if it's all some sort of elaborate illusion, or if it's my own mind going off the deep end. Still, the fellow captains I shared drinks with earlier tonight seem to have been able to leave without any problems. Nevertheless, I think that watching what I say would be a good idea. Seems like an ideal place for someone wanting to gather intel to do it. Someone like this bartender. I'm not sure I trust his story. I'm not even sure why I bothered to record this log. If what they say is true, it will likely not survive the trip out of this pocket dimension either. But just in case, why not?
Why is the rum gone?
I've spotted a few friends across the bar and I'm headed their way now. They look just as confused as I was earlier. Let's see what we can learn. There has to be more to this place than just drinks and stories.
Well, look what the cat dragged in.
Ha ha ha, Holt Allen. Seems like we keep running into each other. Nice to see you too. And Hikaru Sulu.
Ray.
They were just telling me you made captain. Nice uniform. Maroon though, isn't that an Aggie color?
Aggie?
Never mind, old joke. It actually looks very sharp. Hope I get one myself one of these days and out of these pajamas. They're about the most uncomfortable suits I've ever had to wear. I admit that having a force field belt is nice in an emergency, but it's damn annoying the rest of the time.
Don't worry. Starfleet will phase them out very quickly, Ray. Nobody liked them. And there were safety issues with continuously wearing the force field belts that you'll hear about in time. Not safe for would-be parents, for one.
Yeah, Dr. Thelov was rather concerned with wearing them all the time.
So was Dr. McCoy.
I'm not sure. I'll have to worry about it myself.
Yeah, I suppose not, Holt. Still, things might turn around for you.
I don't think so. Anyhow, are you still captain of the Saladin?
I am. She's been fully upgraded. The new dual warp core engine, forward and rear firing photon torpedoes. Damn. But maybe that's too much information for a place like this.
We were wondering about that ourselves, actually, Ray. Even though I've been here once before with Captain Kirk, I've run into my doppelganger in the mirror universe before, and we really don't know anything definite about this place or the bartender. Let's not discuss anything that could be useful to spies, alright?
Agreed, Captain Sulu.
If this place exists outside our time and space, I'm surprised it's locked only to our own universe. Why not any of the other dimensions we suspect exist? Why not that mirror universe? I've met my own twin as well, though, and it's not something I care to repeat.
Amen to that.
Well, if it's not Cadet Martin all grown up.
Mia Colt?
Call me Janie. I don't like to go by Mia anymore. Not since, well, a long time ago. And a story I'd rather not be reminded of. What brings you gentlemen to the captain's table?
I came in to drown my sorrows. And you, gentlemen?
I was touring my newly refit ship and went to the officer's lounge and ended up here. I was supposed to meet my wife there. I'm not sure why I ended up here. Part of me is suspicious about it, but part of me seems to be way too relaxed, and that bothers me.
Maybe it's that margarita you're still nursing.
Maybe it's drugged.
Hardly. I've been here several times. Now, understand that when you leave, you forget everything. But if you come back, you do remember.
About that, why is that?
Honestly, I'm not sure. It's like being able to see something that's only real here.
But how would you forget it outside of here, and yet remember it when you return? Memories don't just pop into existence and pop out of existence, do they?
While you're asking that question, why not ask how does this place even exist at all? Maybe we should ask the bartender.
I don't trust him. Call me paranoid, but something about this place just doesn't sit right with me.
Ray, I've met friends here that I haven't seen in decades. And the way they react is exactly the way they should. Their memories are real.
Yeah, how do I know any of this is real? Or any of you? How do I know this isn't some sort of alien trying to tap into my memories or something, telepathically?
Well, that's hardly impossible. And if it is what is happening, if it's an illusion, there's nothing we can do about it, except possibly cloud our minds with hate. But I tried that once. It didn't seem to do anything. Sometimes things happen in the universe that you just have to accept as beyond our understanding. Consider it a gift from a more advanced race that's studying us. Time to put on your best Starfleet behavior and represent the Federation as best we can.
So, Captain Colt, you sound like you've run into illusionists before. How about you tell us about it? Sounds like quite an adventure.
I'd like to, Captain Allen, but this one is one that Starfleet classified as top secret, so I can't say a word about it. Sorry.
Fair enough, Captain. I'll accept that what we're seeing is real, for now.
That's the spirit, Ray. Ready for another drink?
Well, I am off duty. All right, you've twisted my arm. Thanks. So, Holt, what's new on the Antilles?
Well, let's see. I remember an early adventure. One I had when I was a much younger man than today. So, having turned 16, I had to make some serious decisions about what I wanted to do with my life. My father, Edwin Allen, was in law enforcement. In fact, he was a captain of what you would call the local precinct. I lived in the Cremon province at this time, and there was a series of kidnappings that was occurring, which kept my father and his forces very busy. At the time, I didn't give it all that much thought. And then one day my father, in a rare conversation that wasn't work-related, asked me to go into the local Cravian town to do some shopping. I took my good friend Abbas with me, and Abbas was really one of my closest and dearest friends at this time. You have to understand something about our culture. We pride ourselves on our physical health. A healthy person was considered something to be wished for. Abbas, unfortunately, was born with a deformed arm, and he spent many years of his life being frowned upon, cursed at. It was not a good time for him. However, I never had a problem with his deformed arm, and we became really good friends. In fact, we never even spoke of it. So anyway, Abbas and I went into town, and we went into the marketplace, and everything seemed fine and normal until we ran into this very, very beautiful woman named Lissa. And she was saying something about there was this sale at this particular building, and would we like to join her? Of course we said yes. So the three of us went into this building when Lissa said there's a special room at the back of the marketplace where you can really get good deals. It's not always available to the public, but very special customers. I should have raised the alarm bells in my head, but instead all I kept thinking about was how beautiful this woman was, and if she recommended something, I was going to do it. Abbas said something like, okay, and I said, lead on. She smiled. We followed her to this back room, but when the door opened and we entered the back room, it was an empty room, and I turned to Lissa, and the next thing I know, something hit me on the back of the head, and I blacked out. It seemed an eternity in that darkness, and when I woke up, I found myself in a walled-in dungeon-like room with Abbas, chained to a wall, and being greeted by this huge, monstrous-sized alien who I had never seen before. He certainly wasn't native to our planet. Of course, I asked, where are we? What's going on? Oh, that giant creature came up and he walloped me one, which stunned me. And he said, silence. You are not to speak unless asked to do so. Abbas looked white and stricken. He couldn't believe the situation he found himself in either, and Lissa was nowhere to be found. The creature announced himself as Volpe Nanva. He asked, did I have any fighting skills? Or I said, of course I can fight. And if I wasn't chained up, he would regret it. He laughed very strongly at this and said, you'll get your chance. He left the dungeon, and Abbas and I looked and said, would you recognize this place? Do you know what's going on? He said he didn't. I asked where Lissa was, and Abbas said, I have a feeling that she led us here, and she was responsible for us getting captured. I told Abbas, well, you know, my dad's in charge of law enforcement. I'm sure he's bound to find us. And Abbas said, providing we're still on the same planet. And that was a very sobering thought. Volpe Nanva returned the next day. He said we were to enter the Thenarian competition. It was sort of a underground network of fighting in these old arenas left behind from the old age, the very beginning of our civilization. There used to be fighting to solve many differences, everything from national policy to religious views. People fought to the death for a variety of reasons. Eventually the games were banned by the government, and then the arenas became something of a curiosity. Now, Volpa was telling me that we were in one of these arenas. The fighting was very real, and it was to the death. I asked him, what if I refused to fight? And he said I would be executed on the spot. I said, well, what happens if I fight and I win? And he said I would earn my freedom. And then he turned to Abbas and said, you are a deformed one. You will be sacrificed in the arena. And I said, leave my friend alone. And Volpa Nanva turned to me and said, you do not give the orders. We waited a week. It was scary for us. We just didn't know what was going to happen. And then one day the door to our chamber opened up and we were led out into the arena. And to my amazement, there was a huge crowd in the audience. And they were cheering and booing. And this small alien came up to us. He put a sword in my hand and he gave Abbas a shield. We were approached by Volpa Nanva, and he was now dressed in armor, and he had two swords in his hand. And he turned to a raised dais, and in the dais was a shadowy figure. And he said, as the leader, he was proud to commission the starting of the new Thanarian competition. We were led to an area, a waiting room, and the fighting began. It seemed that there were rounds where two opponents would fight a heavily armed warrior. They all seemed to be of the Volpi Nanva species, but the opponents were all different kinds of species. The fighting was short and brutal per round, with the armed warriors constantly winning, and pretty soon they ran out of people to slaughter. The leader announced that it was our turn, and we were led out, and there was Volpa Nanva, smiling, saying that we would not be much of a challenge. Well, what could I do? I clutched my sword. I told Abbas to stay near me. Battle was brutal. Volpa was very well trained, and soon we were cut with very deep wounds. But something in me refused to give up. The battle continued, and it looked like we were going to lose. But the good news was Abbas had managed to avoid getting badly hurt, hiding behind his shield. And then I looked at him and he looked at me, and we both knew simultaneously what we had to do. I feigned a lunge to one side of Volpa, half turning him. At that exact moment, Abbas threw the shield with his one arm as hard as he could. It headed for Volpa's head, causing him to get distracted. I saw my opportunity, and I went in, and I felt my sword dig in deep. I hadn't killed the man, but I had wounded him bad, and he staggered back in shock. Abbas smiled, feeling the tide was turning. I went up to Volpa. I raised my sword up. I swung. I eventually worked the sword out of Volpa's hands. The fans were going crazy. People were chanting. Even the leader was screaming, "Finish him off! Finish him off, and you will live!" I was about to make my final move. As the sword went up in the air, suddenly there was this booming sound. An explosion rocked one of the walls, and all of these law enforcement officers came running in, led by my father. When the dust settled, the leader was arrested, along with Volpa and the other surviving warriors, and eventually I found myself in the law enforcement vehicle heading back home. There were many things going through my mind. Abbas looked at me and said, "Holt, were you really going to kill him?" And I said, "I believe I would have. Our lives were on the line. And when push comes to shove, I want to live." And Abbas smiled and said, "Yes, I don't believe we had a choice." And my father grunted something that sounded like approval. And I said, "Father, how did you find us and come to save us?" And my father, Captain Edrin Allen, turned to me and said, "Well, when I sent you into town to go shopping, I put a tracking device on you. I knew that many people of your age, particularly the men, were disappearing. And I interrupted him. I said, "You used me as bait? You put a tracker on me hoping I'd get kidnapped?" Well, it was a long shot, but yes, I was willing to take that risk. And I said, "Oh, thanks a lot." I said, "But why did it take a week to find us?" Well, the tracker malfunctioned at one point, and although we were getting close, we lost the signal. However, suddenly the signal came back on. And I realized one of the wounds I suffered from Volpi Nonva had struck my shoulder blade, and apparently that was where the tracker was, and it seemed to shake it back into life. So by him attacking me in a way, he saved all of us. In the end, this illegal arena game was busted, people were incarcerated, and my father was promoted. I did get a feeling to pursue some form of justice, and I thought of Starfleet. And Starfleet combined the two things that I wanted most: exploration and a sense of doing good in the universe. And so I shortened my name and I joined Starfleet, and the rest, as they say, is history. Oh, and my friend Abbas, well, believe it or not, despite his deformity, he ended up joining law enforcement, and he became a highly decorated police official in his own right. And we're still friends to this day. Oh, and I finally discovered what happened to Lissa. She was the daughter of one of the kidnapped warriors who was forced to do the fighting. And he was told that she would be killed if he did not fight. So, that day, she was freed. And she apologized to me and said she was so sorry, but she had no choice. And I did forgive her. I did lose touch with her, though, and I often think, I wonder what it would have been like had we not met under such strange circumstances. Oh well, I did eventually meet the great love of my life, but that's another story for another time. Well, there you have it. My story of blood and glory, all at the tender age of 16.
Thank you, Holt. I think I understand a lot more about your culture and what made you who you are now. It explains a lot of things we never had a chance to talk about. And that was a great story, my friend. Okay then, Jamie, your turn. Since you can't tell us about the illusionists, how about a different story? I remember my cadet mission on the Enterprise with Will Decker back when Christopher Pike was captain and you were still his yeoman.
Give me a minute to think of something you'd be interested in hearing.
Sure, Jamie. Waitress, Captain Colt needs a drink.
No, I'm fine with this one, thanks.
Ray, I don't know if you kept up with him, but your friend Decker was captain of the Enterprise for a time and oversaw her refit and redesign.
Yeah, I heard just last week that he and my former navigator, Ilea, were both lost to that alien probe that almost destroyed Earth. I remember how excited Decker was to get the Enterprise. The Kelvin was a nice ship, but the refit Enterprise is just the best ship in the fleet. I ran into one of Will's great-nephews earlier this evening. It's nice to know that his legacy lives on, even if he is gone. Let's have a toast. To Will Decker and Ilea, Delta 4.
I'm pretty sure that they're not dead exactly, Ray.
Really? I've been meaning to read the log of what happened. What do you know?
Well, when the V'ger probe beamed aboard the Enterprise onto our bridge, it started running our defense computer database to get data on Earth's defenses. Mr. Spock smashed the console to stop it. That's when the probe zapped Ilea. She vanished and we thought she was dead, but later she reappeared on the ship in her quarters. But she was now in an android body and was under the control of V'ger. Decker was assigned to try to access her memories and make it possible for us to communicate with V'ger, since we still had no idea what it was.
If I heard the news report correctly, it was the old Voyager 6 probe sent back to us by some advanced civilization, but its programming was all messed up. Kind of like that Nomad probe, if I remember correctly. Where a Nomad has gone before.
That's right, exactly.
A pretty big coincidence if you ask me. But the Enterprise was always in the thick of coincidences. Makes me wonder if the hand of fate wasn't involved somehow. I myself had an interesting experience in an alternate timeline that involved both Captain Kirk and Captain Pike.
They do seem to be the ship in the quadrant whenever something interesting is going on.
Oh, stop it. You sound like Captain Kirk now. Eventually, Decker succeeded in his task, but in the process, he was absorbed by V'ger. Once that happened, he and Ilea, along with the probe, just vanished. Captain Kirk spoke of a higher dimensions, and perhaps they live on somewhere, experiencing things we can only dream of. Well, I prefer to think so.
Thanks, Hikaru. I hope they are still alive and happy, wherever they are. I appreciate the details, even if I won't remember them after we leave here. It's pretty unfair if you ask me. Anyhow, Jamie, how did your career progress from being a yeoman on the Enterprise to captain of the Challenger?
Oh, you know my ship.
You forget, where I come from, your present time is from my past. I can say you have some interesting adventures lined up. But I've never heard the story of how you got started on the path to command. I'd enjoy hearing that one. Does it have anything to do with your time travel adventure with Kirk and Pike?
That's a long story. But since you asked, it all started on the planet Algol 2 with an artifact I discovered. The best way I can describe the way it looked was a snow globe. Legend said that it could show you your future. Joe looked into it and saw his. I didn't see one at all, just blackness. Nervously, I took it back to the Enterprise and scanned it with a tricorder. And that was when things got weird. The orb began to glow, and I was transported through time to an alternate future. A couple of Starfleet goons, forgive me, Captain Sulu, in uniforms like your own, tried to capture me, claiming I was an escaped mental patient, just because my uniform was a few decades old.
No offense, Jamie. Please continue.
Admittedly, my resisting their attempt at capture by swinging my tricorder at one of them and punching the other did nothing to change their minds. But I wasn't about to let them grab me. I ran down the corridor, wondering where everyone was, until I ran through a wall opening and out into a museum. To my horror, the Enterprise was now part of an exhibit at the Smithsonian Air, Sea, and Space Museum in San Francisco. The goons came after me, and so did security. I was on a high balcony, but had nowhere to go. Headstrong as I was at the tender rank of ensign, I leaped off the rail and down onto the 20th Century Space Shuttle Enterprise display, landing on the wing. Foolish thing to do, but youth has its drawbacks, I suppose. I slid down the wing, and below me was the mast of a replica of the sailing ship Enterprise. I landed on the main mast, and after catching my breath, looped the strap of my tricorder over one of the ropes and slid down. Did I mention that all the while I was doing this, the guards were firing their phasers at me? If they'd have hit me, even unstunned, I'd have fallen to my death.
Are you sure they were real Starfleet security and not civilians in costume? Even as a cadet, I would have known better than to fire at someone in a situation like that.
I'll get back to that, Ray. Once I landed on the deck, I ran outside, past the museum guests, and out into the rain. It was surprising, because I don't recall ever seeing rain in San Francisco in my days at the Academy. But there it was. I ran with no plan in mind, but someone was still following me. So I hid in the bushes, and when he started looking around, obviously for me, I jumped him.
Who?
James T. Kirk.
Oh, I should have known. Captain Kirk always seemed to be in the thick of things, especially around beautiful women.
Why, thank you, Hikaru. But he was no Starfleet captain in this reality. And he managed to shock me right away, because he recognized me as Mia Colt, an officer of the Enterprise that vanished decades earlier. Needless to say, I followed him to get as much information as I could. We went to a bar. Zephram Cochrane's Phoenix was hanging from the ceiling over us as we sat down. I thought it might be a little too public after my earlier escapades, but Kirk wanted my story. I told him that he probably knew more than me, but I told him what had happened. He then told me his story. As I learned later, it was far different from the reality we remember now, though it was all news to me at the time. Apparently, when I was lost, Captain Pike had a vacancy in his crew that Kirk was ordered to fill, instead of taking a post on the USS Farragut. He and Pike didn't get along. One thing led to another, and Kirk left Starfleet for the private sector. He obviously regretted it. It was the reason he was at the museum looking at the Enterprise in the first place. Might have been and all that. I asked him to help me. At first, he was resistant to the idea. This Kirk seemed a bit fatalistic at first, but then with some urging on my part, he decided that it was worth a try to make a different future for himself, and decided to help me. We went aboard his ship, the Bounty. I know, right? Mutineers.
Oh, that's not it. Exactly. Please continue.
It was no starship, but it was his ship. He introduced me to his ex-Starfleet crew of misfits. Not a one of them wanted to help me, or at least they protested at first. I think it was a lot of show and feigned annoyance. The civilian sector will do that to you. Anyhow, the plan was to get back to Algol 2, to a place of legend called the Well of Tomorrows. The problem
was that it's deep in Klingon territory now.
That's right. Kirk had Mr. Scott pushing the ship to warp 8, but it lost all power, and the next thing we knew, we had a Klingon D7 on our tail. The commander of the ship was toying with us, trying to take us apart piece by piece. But Kirk turned the ship around and fired down the torpedo tube of the ship just as it was launching a torpedo, taking out their launcher, but incurring their wrath in the process. Their weapons fire came in hard, and I thought we were dead until the Enterprise A arrived. They fired, and the damaged Klingon ship retreated. That's when we were hailed. It was Admiral Pike. And you were at the helm, Hikaru.
No ship of my own, then.
Not then. But then again, the story isn't over yet. We were all arrested. Kirk was escorted away, while the rest of us were taken to the brig. Soon after, Mr. Spock came to see us. His eyebrows conveyed his astonishment at seeing me, and I smiled broadly at him. I told him my story, and he lowered the force field and escorted me to the bridge. When I stepped off the turbo lift, I saw Kirk rubbing his jaw and Pike standing over him. And I saw Joe Tyler. He was older, but still handsome. He was in shock seeing me, and though Pike was also glad, he was more than a little suspicious. It wouldn't be the first time he'd seen things that were questionable to him. He sent me to sickbay to get confirmation of my identity and told Kirk to join him in the briefing room. Kirk bargained for the rest of his crew to be released just as the doors shut behind me. In sickbay, I discovered that Nurse Carlotti was now the ship's chief medical officer. We talked about old times, and as she was telling me about Commander Chapel's command post, Spock interrupted us, suggesting that if I knew too much about that present time, my return home could disrupt the timeline.
Morgan Chapel. She got command of the USS Archangel.
I know. I read your report on what happened to her. Her command is part of what drove me on to get the Challenger, but I'll get to that. Spock escorted us to the briefing room, where Pike explained that he would follow Kirk's plan to get me home. And Spock revealed that if I didn't get home in the next 4 days, being out of sync with my timeline would kill me, and possibly my absence from the timeline might destroy reality itself. So Admiral Pike ordered the Enterprise to Algol 2, despite the threat of a war with the Klingons. Starfleet hailed us to warn us back, but Pike had Commander Uhura scramble the reply signal. Starfleet ordered another ship to hunt us down. But before we learned about that, I had to meet with Joe. He told me that he loved me. I told him I was a ghost, and that he needed to forget me. It was very hard, but I knew that if I made it back to the past, I'd see him again, and maybe things could work out better in that life for us than they had in this messed up future. That's when the ship was hit by disruptor fire. Joe and I rushed to the bridge.
Why are you looking at Sulu like that?
The helm console exploded in a shower of sparks. You died.
Oh my.
The Enterprise was crippled and drifting, shields down. The Klingons were about to destroy us when two of the birds of prey exploded. It was the Excelsior that came to our aid, commanded by Pike's former number 1. And its mission was to escort us back or destroy us. Captain Morgan Robbins had her orders, but after seeing me and hearing the explanation, she let us go.
Robbins? I thought Chapel was her last name.
Her married name.
She was married?
Divorced, remarried, then widowed. Bad luck.
That explains it. Thanks. So she let you go. Good for her. I always liked her. Tough, but she had a strong sense of loyalty and honor.
She did. Anyhow, we made it to Algol. I was sure we needed to find the Well of Tomorrows, the legendary source of the keepsake orb's power to travel through time. I didn't know what to do, but I knew the only way to see Joe again, and I had realized just how much I wanted to see him again, was to go through with the plan. We were saying our goodbyes when I kissed him for the first time. Strange for me, but stranger for him, I think. He had waited for me for over 20 years. I knew in my heart that he was the man for me, at least at that moment. So anyhow, Kirk led the landing party, leaving Admiral Pike to fend off General Chang, who by this time was enraged and wouldn't stop until the Enterprise was destroyed once and for all. We beamed down right on top of the ruins of the Well of Tomorrows, and it spoke to us. It told me I had to return, and the only choice I had lay before me. I had to leap into the well. Kirk told me it was time, and the last thing I saw was a Klingon battle force heading our way, firing weapons. I told him goodbye and leaped into the darkness. But as I traveled through the portal, I had visions of the future and the past. I saw the Enterprise destroyed. Kirk and Scott and the rest of the Bounty's crew dying heroically. But I also saw them live again. And then it was bright, too bright to see. And suddenly, I fell into Joe's arms, and I knew that was where I belonged.
So you were home. Obviously you had a peek at the future. You remember it now, but did you remember it then? What happened next?
I did retain the memories. They are as vivid now as they were then. As for what happened, being a junior officer, things happened aboard ship I'm not privy to, even being the captain's yeoman. But after I returned, we handed over the orb to the captain. I assume he returned it to the Algolians, but the entire incident was classified, so he might not have. Such a device in the wrong hands could potentially be the most destructive weapon ever conceived. Anyhow, for a while, Captain Pike seemed rather more listless than usual. I couldn't help but wonder if he saw something in his future he didn't like. And after what happened to him on the Daedalus, I often wondered if he saw that future. Within a day, though, we were hosting a guest of honor, the former captain of the Enterprise, Admiral Robert April.
I thought he was a Commodore.
Well, he was a lot like Captain Kirk, Ray. I've heard some of this story before, but I'm interested in hearing Jamie's eyewitness story.
Robert April had his own ideas on how a ship should run. He didn't much care for women on the bridge, for one. At least that was the impression I got from him every time I was up there. And the way he dealt with number 1 was pretty condescending. Captain Pike was a little like that himself, but not as extreme as April was.
So I assume this made a big impression on you?
You better believe it. While Captain Pike, Dr. Boyce, and Mr. Spock were on a top-secret mission, Commander Robbins was in temporary command. She had just turned down her first offer to command the scout USS Nelson, which had lost her captain in the battle with the Chakun, shock troops that served the Tholian assembly. She turned it down, and Admiral April thought that made her a poor fit to sit in the captain's chair on the Enterprise, apparently. The two of them butted heads for some time. I admired the commander's ability to stand her ground. I honestly couldn't understand Joe's admiration of the man. He just seemed so arrogant.
I remember when he and his wife Sarah came aboard the Enterprise years later. He was the model of courtesy. He sounds like he was a very different person then.
Well, people do change. Most people mellow with age. He was still in his 50s at this point, and in my opinion, he was bitter that he'd had to give up command for a desk job.
Well, that happens to the best of us. I remember when Admiral Kirk had a very similar issue during the V'ger incident. But, go on.
Well, I've gone on a long time, but to get to the main part of the story, I'll get right to the point. We were in orbit of the Tamazi homeworld.
Oh, that's a hotbed of xenophobia if I ever heard of one. They apparently sit on top of an ancient storehouse of technology given to them by the Takan Empire.
Yep, and the Klingons wanted to get their hands on that technology for themselves. Captain Pike and the others were on the surface attempting to find the Klingons behind this when we were attacked by their ships in orbit. A Klingon shuttle was returning from the surface, and aboard it were our party and the Klingon team.
The battle stopped, but it got worse. Because from the planet below, alien devices were launched and began attacking us and the Klingons. This is where things got ugly. Helmsman Mohindus had been next in line to get the XO position, but when Number 1 declined her command offer, Mohindus was out of luck. She saw her opportunity with Admiral April and deliberately started jumping to his orders, despite Number 1 being in the command chair. When the alien devices destroyed the Klingon ships, he ordered a point-blank photon torpedo launch against them, and the detonation sent a shockwave back at the Enterprise. And worse, the bridge section of the destroyed Klingon D-7 smashed into our saucer. Commander Robbins was knocked unconscious, and April took command. The medical team came to the bridge in a big hurry, and she was taken to sickbay. I took the engineering station because Mr. Sampson was also injured. There was no sign of the shuttlecraft. Commander Robbins was knocked unconscious, and April took command. A medical team came to the bridge in a big hurry, and she was taken to sickbay. I took the engineering station because Mr. Sampson was also injured. There was no sign of the shuttlecraft. The look of pure rage on Joe's face made me proud of him as he told April, "One way or another, Admiral, it looks like you've got your command back." The official log was redacted from that point forward. But seeing as how no one here will remember it when we leave, anyhow, I'll tell you.
As much as I'd like to hear it, are you absolutely sure? The walls may have ears.
Honestly, it's all right, I think. The Enterprise was severely damaged by the collision with D-7. We were able to stabilize her and seal off the hull breaches, but we lost a dozen crewmen. To April's credit, he tried to locate survivors. We found the Klingon shuttle after the sensors came back online. They were drifting in a decaying orbit. We locked a tractor beam on them and towed them to the hangar deck. Commander Robbins regained consciousness a few hours later, and the captain came back to the bridge. But April kept the center seat of configuration. More Klingon ships were on their way, and the Takan technology was still being deployed against us. Our mission was not to cause further damage relations with the Tamazi people, but everything had gone to hell rather quickly. Pike and April left the bridge after the Enterprise had retreated to the outer limits of the star system. I went with them to record the details of the meeting in the briefing room. By this time, Number 1 was on her feet again, and she glared daggers at April, who, for his part, seemed shamed over the way events had unfolded. The conversation went back and forth between ideas to de-escalate the situation with the Tamazi and how to deal with the Klingons. We had aboard ship the Klingons who had been on the surface. Their commander had a blood feud with Captain Pike that he had put on a temporary truce so that they could tell all escape execution at the hands of the Tamazi. While they were escaping, he sacrificed himself, apparently ending the blood feud. But they were away from there now, and his second officer saw his opportunity of the Enterprise to hand Pike the ultimate defeat. Even though he was in the brig, he planned to take the ship and use it to attack the Tamazi. His plan was to make the Federation look like the invaders and the Klingons as the heroic rescuers. When he escaped, he took auxiliary control and set the Enterprise on a collision course with the heart of the Tamazi civilization in their capital city. While we were in our conference, the Klingons made their move. There was one Klingon, however, a woman, that had a great deal of respect for Captain Pike, and had been, unknown to the Klingons, a Federation operative. She warned us. It was too late to stop their commandeering auxiliary control, but at least we knew what was happening. The command staff jumped into action, and Pike sent Number 1 to the bridge, while he and April headed for the transporter room. I went to the bridge with Number 1. When we exited the turbolift, we saw on the main view screen the Tamazi homeworld filling the field of view and getting closer by the minute. Number 1 hailed the planet's government to warn them what was happening. She tried to advise them that our ship was out of our control and to evacuate their main city and raise their defenses. She knew that it would be the end of our starship, but she wasn't going to let the Enterprise destroy tens of thousands of people. We watched helplessly as she repeated the warnings and the Takan ships closed on us. Meanwhile, the captain and the admiral had beamed themselves into auxiliary control. They stunned the Klingons and took back control of the Enterprise, veering us away from the Tamazi and their Takan warships, which fell back and delayed pursuit as if receiving an order to stop. When the Klingon reinforcements arrived, we hailed them and explained the situation. Commander Kang ordered the squadron to stand down and command over their creatures, less our own operative, who remained on the Enterprise. While Kang was hardly happy about the situation, it was honorable, and they left the system. But not before we were hailed and warned off by the Tamazi, never to return, or it would be considered an act of war. Still, Admiral April commended Number 1 for her actions. To his credit, it was honest and sincere. He entered into the official log his recommendation that she be reconsidered for a command of her own, quote, when she felt she was ready.
And that was the Archangel, about 6 months later, right?
Yes, not long after you and Mr. Decker and several other cadets had a little survival test of your own on Berengaria 7.
I remember it well.
That was our last mission before we came home, and I was transferred to the Ajax. I spent many years on that ship, eventually rising to first officer. A lot of things changed for me over those years. Not all of them good by any stretch. It didn't end well. But I did end up in command of the USS Challenger not long after. But throughout my career, I've always remembered Morgan's leadership and self-confidence, and I'm so very glad that the Saladin found her out there and brought her and Archangel home.
So am I. Thanks for sharing your story, Jamie. It was certainly a good one.
Anytime, Ray. Oh, who's this?
Greetings, ladies and gentlemen. As long as you're telling stories of how you got command of your ships, I'll tell you what put me on a course to command the Grandeur, if I may join you. Captain Larry Roop of the Starship Grandeur at your service.
Pull up a chair, Captain Roop. You look to be from far in our future. Tell us about your ship. This might very well be the highlight of the night, as stories go.
That's a lot to live up to, coming from the famous captain of the Antilles. I'll do my best, though. Getting promoted is always something every Starfleet officer looks forward to. The day a person can make the next highest rank or be assigned to a higher position can be the day it changes their life forever. I was eagerly awaiting the time when that day would come, when I would be promoted to captain and have my own ship to command. I had been working toward that day for my entire Starfleet career, but one moment in time could have changed all that. One split-second decision could have altered the effects of history. Would the orders I had to give on my next away mission jeopardize the ship I served on and my career? Or would my actions produce an outcome that would ultimately promote Commander Roop to Captain and give me the Captain's chair?
Wait, Captain Roop? I'm Ray Martin of the Saladin. So you're the man I spoke with from the future. I confess, I wasn't all that sure you were legit, but I'm glad to see that you are. Well met, Captain. Share a drink with us?
I'm real enough, Captain Martin. Nice to see that you are as well, and that you have survived that encounter with the Davidians.
So that's what you call them. Interesting. I got the impression that you knew way more about them than you were telling me. Since we won't remember a thing when we leave, at least satisfy my curiosity now, will you?
Why not? The Davidians are a race that steal the life energy of others. Your encounter with them was before their nature was known, but they had been to Earth in the past. Oftentimes, their arrival and settlement coincided with outbreaks of plagues. This was a cover for their vampiric appetites. While they are not classical vampires, they feed on the life force of human beings and other sentient races in the galaxy. I honestly thought that you were about to die, because no record of an encounter with them exists prior to the Enterprise D encounter a few years ago. My time. Thankfully, you survived it.
Indeed, Captain. Thank you again for your advice, such as you were able to give under the circumstances. I apologize for not giving you more trust, but you have to understand what my situation was.
Of course, Captain. Had our positions been reversed, I'd have felt exactly the same way as you, I'm sure.
Well, how about your story then? We're all ears.
Well, gentlemen, many have asked me how I became captain, and of course, I have always gave the standard quick answer. Run the ranks, work hard, and when you make commander, and especially first officer, work your hardest, and soon it will pay off. Somebody higher up will take notice, and soon you will be captain. Tonight, however, since this is a place for stories, I will give you a very short, condensed story on what led me to the captain's chair. I was first officer of the Venture when the captain got orders to check out a planet in the Talaran sector that was at some point becoming part of the United Federation of Planets. Apparently, there were some sort of strange happenings, and we were told to investigate. When we had arrived, I had assembled my away team, which consisted of myself, the Chief Medical Officer, Chief of Security, and another security officer. After a few moments of being on the planet's surface, we encountered a gentleman that seemed to be having some sort of stomach pains, but they seemed to disappear quickly. The Chief Medical Officer could not determine the cause of his pains at the time. It was not long after that we met the administrator of the village. He asked what we were doing there, and after I explained our reasons for being there, he assured us there was no cause for alarm and that we could leave and be on our way. That might have been all there was to it if it had not been for the fact that he seemed a bit standoffish, bordering on rude to boot. While we were down on the planet, I learned that our ship had been attacked by several small vessels. Not that they were any match for a Galaxy-class starship, mind you, but with the weapons they had used and some great maneuvering, they managed to cause some damage on the bridge, which resulted in some overhead structures coming down and hitting the captain, rendering him unconscious. While he turned out to be okay, it was not until after the mission when he gained full health again. Needless to say, all the decisions from that point on were left up to me. One of my first decisions that was put on my shoulders was to weigh out staying there and possibly risking a sort of prime directive situation, or leaving. I knew the more we delved into certain situations with what was happening, it would soon be a given I would be risking interfering too much, and that would not be good, especially with the possibility of this culture becoming part of the UFP. Well, with all that had taken place up to this point, I started to have that proverbial gut feeling that things were not right, and no matter the cost, I need more answers to get to the bottom of what was going on. The powers that be at Starfleet headquarters were notified of all that had taken place up to that point. Not having a lot to go on, and what the administrator had told us, their response to my assessment of the situation was one you might expect. While I did not have their total blessing on proceeding much further, they did sort of give me the, well, we'll turn a blind eye to it for now. I knew from that point on I was on shaky ground, and I had better watch myself. What happened from this point on could make an interesting movie of the week, as they used to say, but I will, for the sake of time, cut to the chase. While not immediate, it was discovered that a certain sect of a race known as the Bendai had been conducting various experiments with certain members of the culture we were sent to investigate, and that these experiments could create much greater problems if they were not found and dealt with as quickly as possible. We later discovered that the administrator had known about the experiments, but was basically bribed to look the other way. While risky from a diplomatic standpoint, I elected to get involved and see this matter through. Because of hard work on our part, things turned out for the best, and a lot of good come from our actions. Headquarters felt that I was one that could make the important decisions, stick by my convictions, right or wrong, and get the job done. Thus, it was not long afterward that I was given command of my own vessel, and I have never looked back since. It goes without saying, to be captain, you need to make the tough choices, and right or wrong, stand by your decisions. I am sure, without a doubt, all of you here are that way. What do you say, gentlemen? Shall we give a toast to captains everywhere?
To captains everywhere.
Here.
So, what's your story, Captain Sulu? How did you get command of the Excelsior? Must have been tough after stealing the Enterprise.
Oh, you heard about that?
One of our abject lessons at the Academy in my time. They make a big deal about not going against orders and stealing starships. Cadets informally call it the Kirk maneuver.
Oh my. Well, getting command of the Excelsior was not easy after that.
You stole the Enterprise?
Long story. Seems like they're all long stories. I'm going to need a drink. Hurrah.
Hello, Hikaru. What can I get you?
Sake, please.
Coming right up.
It all started when I served aboard the Yorktown. I met Admiral Nagura, and he put me in consideration for my own command. I was told that I was in line for the Excelsior. This was a few years after the Voyager incident. I was set to take the Excelsior through her transwarp trial runs, but Admiral Kirk asked me to help out with a little cadet training. I spent a year overseeing Excelsior's completion, all the while training cadets along with Chekhov and Admiral Kirk. Mostly uneventful. There were the occasional exceptions, including events surrounding one Cadet Forrester, but I digress. Admiral Kirk had wanted us to reunite for one more training mission while everyone was available. Well, Chekhov was on the Reliant, but almost all of us were on Earth at the time, so we took the cadets on a training cruise with Captain Spock in command. All was well until we received a distress call from the Regular One space station. The transmission was garbled, but it was quite clear that the mood had shifted from a light-hearted training mission to a potential emergency. I knew that Chekhov was in the Mutara sector near the Regular One outpost, and that he'd been working with the scientists there.
I think I can already see where this is going.
Yes, a boatload of cadets was the wrong crew to take on this mission, unfortunately. Anyhow, we went to Regula to investigate, but on the way we came across Reliant. At first, We expected a helping hand from another Federation starship, but when they started firing at us, we knew we'd screwed up. Savik was the smart one. She suggested we raise our shields when they didn't answer our hails. When they did, a person from our past answered. Khan Noonien Singh.
Khan. You know, I haven't met him exactly, but I have met his twin from the mirror universe.
Interesting. You're going to have to tell me about it later.
I will. He's not someone to trifle with, for sure. What happened next?
Admiral Kirk managed to come up with a solution that made Reliant lower her shields. The prefix code. We fired on Reliant and disabled her warp engines. Then Reliant retreated and left Enterprise drifting. We were in no better shape. Our warp drive was offline as well. We proceeded to Regular 1. We found Chekhov and Captain Terrell. What we didn't know was that Khan had used SETI eels to control them. The creatures wrapped themselves around a person's cerebral cortex, making them walking zombies, basically. Open to the power of suggestion, much like deep hypnosis. Khan had left them for Admiral Kirk. He wanted to kill him, blaming Kirk for the death of his wife, one of the MacGyvers, who was once an officer on the Enterprise years ago.
Apparently, in the mirror universe, she was part of the crew of the ISS Saladin. She married Khan there as well, and ended up as Empress for a time.
Really? That's a scary thought.
It was a scary experience. You might remember when the Enterprise was missing in action for a time, Stardate 5267.2, and trapped in another dimension?
Of course. Elysium. The time trap where starships kept getting caught in the Delta Triangle.
Well, that's when we encountered Khan and Tiberius Kirk. But enough interrupting your story. My apologies. What happened to Chekhov and Terrell?
It's alright, Ray. I definitely want to hear your story. Chekhov survived, fortunately, but Khan ordered Terrell to kill Kirk. He fought against Khan's commands bravely, even though resisting the creatures produced severe agony. Jim told me that instead of killing him, Terrell killed himself. Khan stole a powerful superweapon from the scientist. Well, in his hands, it was a superweapon. Starfleet had benign purposes for it, related to terraforming.
Nemesis?
Genesis.
Yes, Genesis. It was designed to create planets or terraform existing ones, but it was a failure as we later learned. But not entirely. So Ray, what is Nemesis?
Nemesis was the weapon Khan of the Mirror Universe was trying to get from Tiberius Kirk. It was protomatter based and highly destructive.
Interesting. Similar device, but naturally with no beneficial purpose behind it. It sounds like the Nemesis weapon was exactly what the Klingon sphere Genesis was in our universe. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Once Khan had Genesis, he still wanted Kirk dead. Once we'd beamed him aboard, Kirk taunted Khan to get him back for another flight. But it was the only way to get Genesis out of his hands. If we had to sacrifice the Enterprise to do it, then so be it. That's part of wearing this uniform.
Indeed it is, Hikaru.
We retreated into the Mutara Nebula and played a game of cat and mouse with the Reliant. For most of it, we were the mouse. But Khan failed to think in 3 dimensions, and Kirk took advantage of it. We destroyed the Reliant's port nacelle and completely disabled the ship. It was at that point that Khan decided to take us out with him and activated the Genesis torpedo. According to David Marcus, we had no chance of escape the torpedo's detonation radius at impulse power. That was when Captain Spock went to engineering. He went into the radioactive core and got the mains online at the sacrifice of his life.
No.
Damn, Spock. He was a good man. I take it you were able to escape thanks to his sacrifice?
Yes, Khan died in the explosion, along with the rest of the survivors of the Botany Bay expedition of the 20th century. The Reliance crew was left marooned on SETI Alpha 5. When we had our funeral services for Spock and our other lost officers, we went and picked them up on our way back to Earth. It was a hard journey, and the pain of our loss was heavy on all of us, but mostly on Kirk. He tried not to show it, But you don't serve with a man for 20 years without getting to know him. He was hurting, badly. On our way to Earth, we were put on radio silence and ordered not to discuss the Genesis with anyone. And Starfleet gave Excelsior to Captain Styles in lieu of myself due to the Genesis investigation.
So, you lost your command before even getting it. That's rough.
My career was pretty much shot already when Captain Kirk told us we had to steal the Enterprise to recover Spock's body and take it to Vulcan.
Huh? Why would you need to do that? Why steal the Enterprise?
The Enterprise was being decommissioned at the time. Starfleet literally wanted it and us swept under the rug. Genesis was a huge embarrassment for Starfleet. Another botched high-profile experiment like the M5 disaster. Only potentially much, much worse. The Klingons were now in fear of war, which was new for them. They felt that they were facing annihilation. Starfleet clammed the lid on anything related to Genesis and wanted anyone who knew anything about it right where they could keep a close eye on them. Only the science vessel Grissom was authorized and sent to study the Genesis planet. As for why we had to steal the Enterprise, it was because Admiral Morrow turned down Jim when he asked to go get Spock's body. Apparently, Grissom had found Spock's torpedo tube casket and had found his body. Ambassador Sarek had demanded Kirk find it and bring him home to Vulcan.
But why would Spock's father want to see Kirk get in trouble with Starfleet? That's not what Spock would have wanted.
How much do you know of Vulcan mind techniques, Jamie?
Only a little. I know that Spock could do a mind meld. That's about it. I know some Vulcans have much greater mental prowess.
Well, I can tell you, it's much more than just that. Apparently Spock had transferred all of his memories, perhaps even his very soul, into Dr. McCoy before he had gone into the warp chamber. His body died, but his mind was joined with McCoy's. And that's why Kirk had to bring Spock back to Vulcan to complete a ritual.
That sounds familiar, actually. I remember Dr. Boyce was helped by a Vulcan legal counselor once when he was blamed for murder. Apparently he was cleared of wrongdoing, though, after a mind meld proved his innocence. Something about alien possession or some such.
Wait, let me get this straight. If Spock's mind was in McCoy's head, why not just go straight to Vulcan? If Spock's body was dead, and I don't mean to be insensitive here, what purpose could it serve?
Saavik had reported that the Genesis effect had regenerated Captain Spock to life. He was a child, but he lived. He was subject to rapid aging, like the Genesis planet itself. Kirk had no idea this had been discovered, but Sarek had much higher security clearance than even Admiral Kirk. It was why he was so insistent that Kirk bring Spock's body home. Sarek didn't tell us until later. Vulcans can be darn sneaky when they want to be.
As they like to say, indeed. So Ambassador Sarek had a plan then?
Yes, I believe he did. To make a very long story short, we stole the Enterprise, disabling the Excelsior's transwarp drive. Then we went to Genesis. We discovered that the Grissom had been destroyed by a Klingon bird of prey, and we were attacked. The Enterprise was hardly in any condition to fight, as it was going to be decommissioned. Scotty's automation gave out after we fired one shot at the Klingons, and they returned fire. Worse, they had Saavik, Dr. Marcus, and Spock as hostages on the planet. The Klingon captain ordered us to surrender the plans for the Genesis torpedo to him, or he would kill them. He ordered one of them killed, just to prove he was serious. Kirk tried to stop him, but the Klingon wouldn't listen. Moments later, Saavik's voice came over the comm and said that David was dead. Jim collapsed and said, "You Klingon bastard, you've killed my son." Up until then, I did not know that Dr. Marcus was Jim's son, as it wasn't general knowledge. My heart broke for the captain at that moment. I was reminded of losing my first daughter, Alana, years ago.
I'm sorry.
We tricked the Klingons into boarding the Enterprise after that, and set the self-destruct before beaming to the surface of the Genesis planet. Shortly after we watched the trail of fire the Enterprise left behind as it burned up in the atmosphere. and things just kept getting worse. The planet was unstable and falling apart around us, reverting back to protomatter. We fought the Klingons, but their captain beamed down and caught us by surprise, forcing our surrender. He ordered all of us beamed up except Kirk and Spock. Spock almost looked like his old self again, amazingly. We had no idea if he'd make it back to Vulcan at that moment. It was not long, however, before our captor was tricked into beaming Kirk and Spock up from the surface. The Klingon commander was dead. We took the ship out of orbit just in time to see the Genesis planet's Armageddon. It exploded before our eyes, and then we went to warp and made it to Vulcan a day later. With the help of an elder Vulcan priestess, Spock's mind was transferred from McCoy's mind back into its new replacement body. You mentioned coincidences, Jamie. I prefer to think of it as divine intervention. Maybe a silly thought in this day and age, but to see Spock resurrected from the dead was enough to give me a moment of serious contemplation.
I can understand why it would.
No kidding.
I guess that was when your career troubles really started.
My career was over. I was now a wanted criminal, like the rest of my fellow crew. We renamed the bird of prey the Bounty in honor of our mutiny against Starfleet.
Now I see why you were laughing when I mentioned Kirk's ship earlier.
Hence the object lesson.
Yeah, I guess so. Exactly right, Jamie.
But you are captain of the Excelsior now, so you must have had a change of fortune.
You hit the nail right on the head, Ray. It took saving Earth from the space probe that I was about to destroy it to do the trick, but it did. It took 2 more years, but I was able to get out from under the shadow of what we had done and back into Starfleet's trust. I was given command of the Excelsior just a few months ago.
I think Captain Sulu wins for most interesting story of the night so far, Captain Allen. Wouldn't you agree? Say, who's that over there? Another captain from your era?
Looks like our uniform. I think I might know him, actually. Tanner. No, that's not it. Banner.
From the Eagle. Tanner was captain of the USS Saratoga a long time ago. He looks like he needs someone to talk to. I'll go ask him. Excuse me. Captain's Log Supplemental. As I walked over to the bar, I happened to run into a Vulcan captain. By his uniform and idic-shaped insignia patch, I realized he was captain of the USS Intrepid, but not the one commanded by Captain Sarek. It had to be Satak, the captain of the original Intrepid, which had been destroyed by a giant space amoeba, similar to the one that almost ate my shuttlecraft years ago, but much larger. Excusing myself, I continued on. Near the door, I spotted Sarek himself and nodded in his direction. He seemed to be curious about the door and his surroundings, and I knew he must have just arrived here for the first time. Noticing me, he raised an eyebrow, and for a moment I was reminded of my science officer Zonak. Zonak himself had been rescued from the Romulans as a child by another commander of the old Intrepid. The details were classified to this day, but maybe I could find out something tonight. Smiling at Sarek slightly, I indicated our table across the room. He nodded, and I resumed my course through the obstacles of the room toward the bar and a familiar, if younger, face. Hey there.
Oh, hey. I didn't see you, Captain. Captain Martin, isn't it?
It is. Call me Ray. You're Zach Banner of the Eagle, aren't you?
Yeah, that's me.
We were wondering if you'd like to come and join us.
Sure, I can do that. Let me finish my drink here.
Captain's Log, Stardate 7604.15. While at Starfleet headquarters preparing for a meeting with Admiral Earl regarding my first officer, I seemed to have stumbled upon some sort of pocket universe and stepped into a lounge full of odd characters, including people from many time periods, past and present. Perhaps it's some sort of All Hallows Eve party humans are so fond of. I shall investigate while I wait for the Admiral's office to contact me. I am seeing Starfleet officers, past, present, and possible future, wearing uniforms from over a century ago, as well as others I do not recognize. I'm also seeing recognizable faces, some of whom died in the line of duty, while others yet to be promoted. I'm going to proceed and ask a server as to where I am, and other important pieces of intel to gather information on this place.
You have heard of me.
Fascinating. Must be some sort of dampening field.
Would you care for a drink, Captain Sarah?
You know me?
I know all the captains who come here. You are Captain Sarek of the Starship Intrepid, the third Starfleet ship to bear the name. My name is Perk. Welcome to the captain's table. Would you care for a drink?
Indeed. I will have Altair water.
Sorry, we don't serve non-alcoholic beverages. It makes for boring stories. Don't look now, Captain, but here comes someone who might want to fight over your ship.
Greetings, Captain. Peace and long life.
Live long and prosper, Captain Satak. I come to serve.
Congratulations on your promotion, Captain. I knew you would reach your goal someday.
Thank you, sir. Most kind.
I am genuine in my compliment, Captain. Tell me, what ship do you command?
It's alright. You can tell him anything. Neither of you will remember anything you talked about when you leave, Captain Sarek.
Very well, Perk. I am in command of the Intrepid, the second starship to bear the name, sir.
Fascinating. Since I will have no memory of this meeting, tell me the disposition of my ship.
The ship and all hands were lost while investigating a giant space-going amoeba in the Gamma Trianguli system. The deaths of 429 Vulcans caused many of us to experience a shock to our systems. It was like an inner scream, then silence. I spoke at the memorial, being the only survivor of the ship. There is now a plaque at Starfleet headquarters and on Vulcan, bearing the name of the ship and all members of the crew. It is a fitting tribute to you and your command, sir.
Fascinating, if unfortunate. Captain, will you join me at the table? I believe you'll recognize some of your comrades.
I would be honored, sir. Tell me, what is this place? I was on my way to meeting with Admiral Lurl.
Sorry, Captain. No admirals allowed in here. It's the captain's table, and it's for captains only.
Gentlemen, I'll be right back. I just spotted some old friends. Sarek, you old space dog. I'm glad you're joining us. Scary, huh, seeing your crew older or former commanders? It takes some getting used to, but I know you, Captain Tough as Nails Vulcan.
Captain Cumberland. I presume you are a captain now.
Yep, and still commanding the Hannibal. Commander Stewart supervised our refit and everything. Ship runs like a charm. What can I get you? First round is on me, Sarek.
I will have an Andorian Galeka juice. Sweet.
Andorian Galeka juice. Well, might have a good story with that. Coming right up, captains.
Thank you, Captain.
For God's sake, Sarek, after all this time, you still don't call me Frisco. Please, it's Frisco.
As you wish. Frisco.
That wasn't so hard now, was it?
Not at all, Frisco. Have you met Captain Satak? He was my former commander on the original Intrepid.
A pleasure to meet you, Captain.
The pleasure is mine, Captain.
Shall we have a seat?
Frisco, good to see you again. Everyone, this is Francisco Cumberland, an old friend of mine, captain of the USS Hannibal.
Old Allen of the USS Antilles.
Everyone, this is Zach Banner of the USS Eagle.
Hello, Captain Banner. Captain Roop of the USS Stranger, at your service.
Jaina Colt, USS Challenger. You can call me Jaina.
Hello, Zach. Old Allen of the USS Antilles.
Frisco Cumberland, USS Hannibal, also at your service. Good to meet you. These are Captains Sarek and Satak, both of the USS Intrepid, coincidentally. And Ray Martin of the Saladin? How about that? Small world.
Hello, Sarek. Captain Satak. Hello, Frisco. Nice to see you again. So tell me, are you keeping Admiral Navarro's old ship in top condition?
Like she'd let me do otherwise. To Elaine Navarro, a class act.
To Elaine Navarro, finest commander I ever served under.
Hear, hear.
I'm Hikaru Sulu of the USS Excelsior. A pleasure, gentlemen. How are you, Captain Banner?
Here's a chair for you, Zach.
By the way, Sarek, there is a rule here. You have to tell a story about your ship, or past. Any story will do.
In fact, I do have a story. On Stardate 5793.6, Commanders Underwood and Enfield were part of the landing party. It was a purely scientific mission, and it gave some of the junior officers some landing party experience. Commander Underwood was collecting samples to be brought to the ship when an alien slug attached itself to her hand. She pulled the creature off, but then let out a scream and collapsed instantly. The doctor and the landing party pronounced her dead on the scene. Commander Enfield carried her in his arms back to the ship. The doctors on board the Intrepid did all they could to save her, but to no avail. I sent a message to Commander Underwood's parents. There were 2 memorials held, one on board ship and one at her home in Nottingham, England on Earth. Her funeral was on Earth and was well attended by friends and various ships, as well as brass. In fact, I was at Starfleet headquarters when I'd arrived here. Commander Underwood was a close friend, and I've known her since Starfleet Academy. We have served together before and on other assignments. I will miss her.
I am sorry for your loss, Captain. It is always hard to lose an officer and a good friend.
Yep, it must be tough. In fact, I remember being at that memorial on Earth. Not a dry eye in the house, except for the Vulcans, of course.
I believe it is your turn, Captain Cumberland.
So it is. We had just completed the change of command ceremony on the Hannibal with Captain Navarro and myself. The present and past crews were enjoying the celebration in the rec room, when all of a sudden, the red alert klaxon sounded. Navarro and I rushed to the bridge. Once there, I offered the center seat to her, but she said, "No, Captain, this is your ship now." I nodded and sat with Navarro on my right. Within all the panic, a lone voice came on the communications console, apologizing for the cross circuits, and the klaxon light stopped. Navarro and I laughed at this. We then headed back to the rec room saying, if this is the worst, then the rest of the dry dock departure ought to run pretty smoothly.
It appears that the Hannibal had quite an ordeal. Most interesting.
I'm glad we survived it. I thought you might like that, considering at the time you were Chief of Starfleet Operations.
Indeed. I am sure the brass was amused when the report came in.
You could say that.
So, Captain Banner, I hope you don't mind my asking, but is everything all right with you? You don't look too well.
Oh, it's nothing. I was just about to head back to my ship from my leave of absence.
It seems like there's a little more to this than just your vacation ending, if I may say so.
Well, I was walking around Starfleet HQ a few hours ago and ran into Mr. Rayton. He's a new recruit at the Academy.
Is this Mr. Rayton someone you know?
Yeah, Rayton was the son of my last commanding officer, Commodore Shrellick. I hadn't seen him in person for 3 years. He'd changed quite a bit in that time.
What ship did you and his father serve on, if I may ask?
The Bismarck.
An early experiment in 3 nacelled configurations, if I recall. One of the pioneers. She was decommissioned after being lost with all hands, wasn't she?
Yeah, that's what happened, basically.
Ah, yes. One of my officers informed me of the incident. She's a friend of your engineer, Mr. Elberg, I think.
Yeah, that's him. Rayton just wanted to talk to me about his father and the time I spent with him. But reliving all those memories in my mind was just...
How long ago did that happen?
Just before the Tech-Neb conflict.
That was right after the peace negotiations with the Klingon sacred ruler, the Katoomba, if I remember my history, when one of the large houses rebelled against the High Council and invaded Federation space.
Right. I lost a few men during the conflict, too. Thankfully, the invasion was stopped before it began in earnest, though.
At least Kirk was able to prevent the all-out war that Malphite wanted. I was lucky I was on leave and missed that little adventure. I wouldn't have wanted to fly the Enterprise to Kronos. Zahn did a good job.
I heard you had a hand in helping stop the war too, Ray. Why don't you tell us about it? You owe us a story, after all.
I suppose so. I told a story earlier, but that was another table and another group of captains. Well, at the time, the Saladin was tasked with finding a Klingon renegade named Kisha. We did. We delivered him to K7 space station in Commodore Probert. After a few high-level meetings, Admiral Sheehan decided that Kirk should take the Enterprise to Kronos to stop the war before it could start.
Why didn't you go, Captain Martin? Saladin found the Renegade, after all.
Saladin was heavily damaged in an earlier conflict with the Klingons and the Romulans at Nimbus 3. We lost our deflector dish, and my chief engineer, Mr. Singh, had his crews out there making a temporary strut to remount it, but it wouldn't have held up to get us to Kronos in its jury-rigged condition. Besides, Starfleet felt this mission would need a Constitution-class starship to represent Federation interests, not a lowly destroyer.
What about the mystery of the Organians' disappearance? I heard you had investigated them just before the Katoomba incident. What did you find out?
All right, I'll start at the beginning, but I'm gonna need another drink.
Margarita for Captain Martin, please. Looks like a frozen one. Okay, Ray, let's hear it.
Keep in mind, we did not know the details of what I'm going to tell you at the time. Our investigation revealed this, but some of it was after the Katoomba incident.
Understood. Go on.
It was Stardate 2618.6. Saladin was on routine patrol. It had been fairly quiet on our mission, but that was about to change in a very big way. It all started when an alien ship popped out of a wormhole over the planet Organia. Their ship was disabled, and so they beamed down to get supplies. The instant they materialized, there was a massive explosion that devastated Organia, leaving the quadrant without any sign of the Organians themselves. The alien ship fled the scene, and the entire quadrant was destabilized. Just a few light years away, Nimbus 3, a lush world and full of life and beauty, was orbited by ships of the three main spacefaring empires, the Klingons, the Romulans, and our Federation. That was where the alien ship went, as it was the closest planet to Organia within their limited range. At the Federation listening post Epsilon 9, Commodore Probert's team learned of the disaster at Organia. Starships were put on alert. The cause of the disaster was still unknown. The USS Saladin was sent to investigate the cause of the devastation. Once we arrived, we determined that a powerful antimatter warhead was detonated there, destroying all corporeal life. There was no sign of the Organians themselves. If they survived, they had apparently retreated to lick their wounds. Saladin found and followed the aliens' trail into deep space, where we unfortunately lost it. Days after the discovery was made that the Organians had vanished, the peace process on Nimbus 3 deteriorated and the conflict began. Meanwhile, the Klingon renegade named Kasha that I mentioned earlier was being hunted by the Klingons. Accusations were that he was a terrorist and was suspected of being the one responsible for blowing up Organia. This was not true. Kasha was the mentor of the Katoomba, the spiritual leader, God Emperor of the Klingons, but he was in exile. His enemies used this propaganda that he was a terrorist as a way to enlist us to help hunt him down. Of course, we didn't know that was the case at the time.
Interesting. I don't think the Organians survived, personally. But do go on.
I don't think they did either, Holt, but time will tell with them. They might just be licking their wounds for now if they did survive. If they didn't, it would be a very sad day. The Organians saved a lot of lives thanks to their treaty. Anyhow, the Saladin was assigned as a backup for a diplomatic mission gone wrong in the Romulan-Klingon Federation border triangle. We had our work cut out for us. We had to rescue the light carrier USS Kelvin, which is disabled over the planet Nimbus 3. Nimbus 3, if you don't know about it, is a world at the dead center of the disputed Triangle sector that could be used by any of the three major powers as a base from which to stage a war on either of the other star empires. With the Organians no longer around to enforce their treaty, any semblance of peace started to fade away pretty rapidly, and it seemed as if the Romulans were only too happy to take advantage of this chaos to further the tensions between us and the Klingons. The Saladin arrived in the middle of this conflict. It was literally open battle when we got there. The same alien ship responsible for the destruction of Organia had appeared over Nimbus 3. They were calling out heatedly in a language that the translators couldn't fathom. Saladin's sensor logs determined that it was a match for the ship that destroyed Organia. My science officers, Zonak and Mitchell, worked together to determine that the ship was made of antimatter and was from another galaxy. Zonak explained that when the aliens beamed to the surface of Organia, the antimatter they were made of reacted with the matter in the air and on the surface and produced an explosion that annihilated the planet's surface almost instantaneously. If we didn't stop them, the aliens might inadvertently do it again. I ordered Lieutenants Randall and Charest to work together to find a translation program that would work to communicate with them before disaster could strike again. Meanwhile, the Romulans and the Klingons were responding to the perceived threat the aliens posed in their usual way, with violence. Zonak's answer exonerated Kasha of wrongdoing, but now it was a fight to prevent another catastrophe over Nimbus 3. We tried to warn the Klingons and the Romulans, but they weren't listening to us. They were adamant that the aliens were hostile. Decker was on the Kelvin and tried to put his ship between Kor's flagship and the aliens. I tried to put the Saladin between Commander Charvanek's ship and the alien as well. Both our ships took a heavy pounding. Neither of them were a match for a D7 or a Romulan KR7. We couldn't stop them. They damaged the alien ship over the planet, dropping its shields.
Oh no.
Exactly. It was too late. Just as my communications officers made peaceful contact with the aliens, the star's solar wind ripped apart the deteriorating vessel, and its warp core exploded. The EMP it generated and the destruction the exploding pieces of the ship caused on entry into the atmosphere laid waste to much of Nimbus 3, turning it into a disaster zone. The aliens were all killed, and we didn't even learn their identities or their exact point of origin. Kor and Charvanek fired on us again, blaming us for the loss of the planet, which was in ruins. Decker and I managed to keep our ships from being destroyed, but we had no choice but to retreat and leave Nimbus 3 in the hands of the Romulan-Klingon alliance.
What about this Kasha fellow?
We followed him to Sherman's planet. He was piloting a Klingon freighter. All the while, we were making emergency repairs. When I finally caught up to Kasha, I found his story quite interesting, but the Saladin was in too bad of shape to make the journey to Kronos. I felt bad handing the mission to Kirk, but there really wasn't any choice, and it turned out to be the right one in the end.
But it didn't stop the Teknev incident a few months later.
Some things never changed, Zach. Once the Organians were gone, the Klingons could get back into their typical pattern of aggression, going back to Axanar, or even further.
And Zach, at least you and Kirk were able to destroy Teneb's planetary artillery beam before it was activated. I remember the Antilles had just stopped a bird of prey squadron from taking a small moon when we'd been informed of the armistice.
That was when my ship was tasked with stopping reinforcements in time for the Enterprise's mission. Rayton told me how much of an honor it was to meet me again face to face after hearing about it.
Loss never gets any easier, no matter the medals or commendations. That can never make up for friends that you'll never see again. I've been there way too many times myself. The M5 disaster, the crews of the starships Excalibur, the Exeter, the Constellation, the Saratoga.
So before the war, Zach, you said Shrellick died right before the conflict with the Klingons. How, if I may ask?
It was a few months after I left. An insane alien computer had hacked into Bismarck's main systems. It filled the ship with radiation and kept shouting that it would torture everyone to death.
You said the computer was taunting the crew, like it was toying with them. Why does that seem so familiar?
What about the insane computer? Weren't you afraid to take it back to Starfleet and infect the space station with a computer virus?
We found the source of the computer attack and destroyed it. It was a probe of some kind. It literally seemed like a madman was trapped inside it. It wanted to kill everyone.
Red Jack. That's what that thing sounds like.
Red Jack?
You've heard of Jack the Ripper, haven't you?
Yes. Why? What did he have to do with a crazy computer?
Red Jack, or Baratus, or Keslak, was an alien entity that feeded on fear. The report said it was known as the hunger that never dies. It got into the Enterprise's computer and started taunting everyone. I was pretty concerned about it until Dr. McCoy shot me up with something that left me high as a kite. But that's what it sounds like. Captain Kirk thought he killed it, beamed the body it was inhabiting out into space, spread its atoms into nothingness. It should have been dead.
Unless it found another machine to inhabit, like it did the Enterprise.
Fascinating. I believe that answers a long-standing question from one of the Intrepid's past missions.
Captain Satak, I believe the table is yours now.
So it is. The story I have took place not too long after you became my science officer, Captain Sarek. It was stardate 4914.8. We were en route to Rigel 4 investigating an unusual occurrence, the event of which are most distasteful, but relative to our conversation. Some of the Intrepid's crew were on leave per my orders. Starfleet requires that even Vulcans take leave from time to time, regrettably. While on the planet's surface, the unthinkable happened. It would seem some murders had been taking place on Rigel 4 that were similar to the most operandi of the ancient Jack the Ripper murders on Earth. Innocent women knifed to death, senseless and barbaric.
I understand, sir, and I remember that time well. As I recall, you asked me to speak, as one of the women murdered was in my science department. As a human would describe it, it was a very somber time.
Indeed, the accused suspects were all exonerated. Each one of them was clueless as to what happened, and the evidence was circumstantial at best. We ended up finding nothing definitive in our investigation. I lost 2 members of my crew before the murderer simply vanished. They were good officers. You state this entity, Red Jack, Baratus, fed on emotions.
Fear? Yes. I'm sorry for your loss. We lost Lieutenant Karen Tracy before we learned the nature of the alien. And what we learned was very basic. We never learned its origin. We thought we'd killed it, but apparently not.
Saladin was in the Rigel system at the time. I heard about the murders on the news vid. We had our own mission to deal with, though. Maybe I'll tell you about it later.
But what of your captain, Zach?
Shrek was the last one to survive. He escaped by shuttlecraft. I found him on Gamma Ceti just before he died.
I'm so sorry.
I understand, Zach. Loss is something every captain will go through. But even if it's a close friend, it's something that can interfere with your duties.
I know you're right. I've been preparing myself for the possibility of losses of friends ever since the Academy, but it doesn't make Sherlock's loss any easier.
I'm sorry. Did I just hear someone say my name?
What? Commodore, you're...
It's Captain Sherlock, actually. Do I know you, sir?
Interesting.
Your uniform. 2250s, if I remember right.
2260, actually.
So you're still in command of the Madison in your time, then?
Yes, we're in port at the moment for upgrades. Again, how do you know me?
We're from your future, Captain Sherlock. Captains Banner, Allen, Sarek, and Colt are about 10 years ahead of your time. I'm Ray Martin, from around 15 or so years out from your time. Captain Sulu and Captain Roop are considerably farther in your future. You might know Satak.
No.
We've never met either, but Captain Banner here is a future acquaintance of yours.
That sounds good.
Yes, we did know each other. You said he won't remember anything I say after we leave, right?
Right. He'll forget anything said in here as soon as he leaves through that door.
Unfortunately, that sounds a tad bit tedious.
I think it's time we let Banner and his friend have one last one-on-one talk.
Agreed.
Right. Here, I'll get you a drink. On me.
I could be interested in something like that.
No, please. I insist. We have a lot of catching up to do.
Sure, sounds great, thank you.
You mentioned coincidences, Jamie? I'm starting to think this might not be such a worrisome place after all. I sure wish I could share a drink with my friend Will Decker one last time.
Perhaps next time, Captain Martin, if you find yourself here again, at the right moment.
Well, something to look forward to then. If I remember, that is.
I'm afraid you won't, Captain. It's just not the way this place works. All you'll remember is having a good time and feeling good when you leave. And wherever you were before, it will be as if no time has passed. Some people have a sense of deja vu on the other side. Perhaps you've had it before?
That's what I remember after leaving here before, yes. That's the best way to describe it, right?
Now I know how that 20th century Air Force fighter pilot, Captain Christopher, felt when we had beamed him back onto his plane as if nothing ever happened to him. I remember his last words before he beamed me down. He said, "Thanks for the look ahead."
Damn, Sulu. You get all the good missions. This fan production of The Captain's Table, Part 2, is a sequel to an audio production by Star Trek Valkyrie. Find their episodes on YouTube and follow them on Facebook. This story was co-written by Kenneth Thompson Jr., producer of Starship Saladin, George Bo Kayan, producer of Star Trek Antilles, Larry Roop of the Grandeur Project, James R. Terry Jr., fan fiction writer of Starship Intrepid, and Michael Studelberg, producer of Star Trek Eagle. The Captain's Table was based on a concept for pocketbooks by John Ordover, featuring the original theme music from Star Trek by Alexander Courage, Fred Steiner, Wilbur Hatch, Joseph Mullendore, also featuring music from the animated series by Ray Ellis, from The Next Generation by Ron Jones, from Star Trek Legacy by Kevin Manthe, and Star Trek Online by Jason Graves. Original theme for Starship Saladin by John P. Funk. No infringement is intended. Star Trek is the property of CBS and Paramount Pictures. The cast is as follows: Captain Ray Martin, USS Saladin, played by Kenneth Thompson Jr. Captain Holt Allen, USS Antilles, played by George Bo Kayan. Captain Hikaru Sulu, USS Excelsior, played by Jamie Sanchez. Captain Larry Roop, USS Grandeur, played by Larry Roop. Captain Jamie M. Colt, USS Challenger, played by Jody Bray. Purg, the Cation waitress, played by Sarah Thompson. Captains Sarek and Satak, both of USS Intrepids, played by James R. Terry Jr. Captain Frisco Cumberland, USS Hannibal, played by Charles Edward Bay. Captain Zach Banner, USS Eagle, played by Elijah Morrissey. Captain Shrellick, USS Madison, USS Bismarck, played by Colton D. Hughes. The bartender, played by Ethan Thompson. Thank you for listening. Follow us on Facebook at www.facebook.com/Starship Saladin. And may the wind be at your backs.